The wind came off the high mesa like a living thing whistling through the sage and rattling the pinon cones so they chattered against the hard ground. I rode with my hat pulled low and my scarf high, tasting dust and cold, and the copper tang of a storm that had not yet shown its teeth. The sky to the west was a wash of bruised purple clouds stacked like wagon loads heavy and slow. I told myself I still had time to make the river crossing before dark. I told myself a lot of things I did not quite believe. I had been riding fences for 3 days, mending wire with numb fingers, and talking to my horse more than a man ought to. The ranch house sat a good 20 miles behind me, and the nearest town was twice that to the east. Out here, sound carried strange. Some days you could hear a hawk split a vole open from half a mile and swear it was at your shoulder. Other days, a shout died 10 paces from your lips and went nowhere. That afternoon, the world felt closed, as if the land had pulled a blanket over itself and left only a slit for me to pass through. I saw the figure near the base of a red rock butte, a color that did not belong to stone or brush. For a while, I thought it was a blanket, snagged by the wind the way it lifted and settled. Then I saw the hand and the bent knees and the way the shoulders moved in quick, shallow breaths. I reined in without thinking. Thunder snorted and stamped, as if telling me that trouble wore the same shape in every language. She looked up when I swung my leg down. The skin of her face was windburned and drawn tight, eyes dark and wary under strands of hair that had worked loose from their braids. She was wrapped in a threadbare shawl, the color of winter grass, and her dress had the dust of weeks ground into the seams. A pair of moccasins sat beside her like regrets. Her feet were bare red at the knuckles. She had tucked them under herself to keep what heat she could. "You hurt?" I asked, though she was already answering me with the way her right ankle lay at a wrong angle. I crouched and kept my hands where she could see them. The air smelled of coming snow and the mineral breath of the butte warm where the sun had baked it all day. She said something I did not understand, then tried again in English, slow and careful. "Twisted on the stones." "I can walk, but not far." I nodded toward the sky. "Far is all we have, I'm afraid." Her eyes flicked to my horse, to the canteen, to the coil of rope on my saddle horn, weighing me like a ledger clerk. I had seen that look before in men who had survived a winter by cutting too close to the bone. There was no plea in it, only the arithmetic of living. What do you have? What do I need? What can we trade that leaves us both standing? "I've got water," I said, "and a bedroll. Fire if the wind lets me." She touched her ankle and hissed a sound like steam. "Name is Laya," she said after a moment. "My family is north. I fell behind." "Sam," I said. "Sam Asher." I unslung the canteen and held it out. She took it in both hands and drank like a person who knew the cost of a swallow. Some people tilt their heads back and pour. She pressed the rim to her lip and drew the water with patience, as if coaxing it, as if any spill would be an insult to the day. I built a small fire in the lee of the rock, feeding it with dry chips scavenged from a dead juniper. The flame kept low, no higher than my palm, because the wind wanted to play thief and because some valleys echo gossip faster than others. I warmed the bedroll by the coals, then eased it around her shoulders while keeping my palms open and slow. She watched me do it, not flinching, not leaning in either. The warmth worked its way into her like a reluctant truth. "We need to set that ankle," I said. "I've got a strip of leather and the rock will give us a splint if we ask nice." She looked at the sky again, then at the butte that rose behind us with its seams and shelves and shadowed creases. "Do it," she said. "Quick." I could have been gentler, but the light was running out and the cold was running in. I pulled, she breathed through her teeth, and the bone slid where it belonged with a sound like a knuckle popping. She closed her eyes and made no other noise. I wrapped the leather tight and used 2 straight sticks to hold the ankle honest. When it was done, sweat stood on her forehead despite the cold. "You've done that before," I said. "I have been hurt before," she answered. The wind shifted and brought with it the far, hollow thump of something like a drum, though it could have been rock loosening its old grief and tumbling down a distant face. Thunder raised his head and pricked his ears. He had a better ear for what the land meant when it talked. "How far north?" I asked. "A day if a person walks all day and does not stop," she said. "2 for me now." I looked at her ankle, then at the sky, then at the narrow trail that ran between the butte in a stand of thorn that clawed the wind without catching any of it. A man can stack choices the way he stacks cordwood, neat and reasonable, and still end up with a cold house if he chose the wrong wood. I knew what the right choice was. I also knew what it could cost. I can take you to the river cabin, I said. It's half a day if we ride steady. A roof and a stove and coffee if the tin is not empty. From there we can see the weather and decide. She studied me the way a coyote studies a trap. I could feel her looking at every way this could go wrong, not just the ones that ended in a bullet. She wrapped the bedroll tighter and adjusted the leather around her ankle with careful fingers. Then she nodded. I can ride, she said, if the horse allows. Thunder snorted again as if he had heard his name and did not like it. He's vain, I said. Likes to be asked. I looped the lead and brought him closer, speaking in the low nonsense a man keeps for animals and babies. Leah reached up and put her palm flat against his neck. For a breath he went rigid, then relaxed by degrees as if he had decided her hand was part of the weather and could not be argued with. I lifted her as careful as I could. She was lighter than I expected, bones and sinew and the stubborn will that holds both together. She set her jaw when her ankle moved and settled herself behind the saddle horn, her hands finding the leather as if she knew it already. I tied what little bundle she had to the back of my saddle, then kicked dirt over the fire until it was only a memory. We moved slow, keeping the butte at our shoulder and the thorn to our right, following the slant of land toward a dry wash that would guide us to the river plain. The sky lowered as if it had changed its mind about us. The first flakes came fat and lazy, then smaller and meaner, needling the face. The world shrank to horse rider and a ribbon of ground 3 steps wide. She spoke once while we rode, voice just loud enough to carry over the wind. You should know, she said, that my people read gifts in a way others do not. A blanket is not only warmth. I thought of the bedroll now, around her shoulders. My grandmother's stitching running crooked at one end, where her hand had grown tired before she finished it. I thought of the nights that bedroll had kept me 1 inch this side of frost. I did not answer. Some things a man lets sit inside him and see what shape they make. The cabin showed itself at dusk like an apology, squared logs and a stone chimney roof patched in places where the snow had taught me humility. I swung down, helped her off, and shouldered the door open. Cold air came out, which is a special insult, but we answered it with a fire that climbed quick once it understood our need. I set coffee on and hung her moccasins by the stove, and for a while the only sounds were the metal tick of warming iron and the river talking to itself under a crust of ice. She sat on the edge of the bunk and watched the flames. When the coffee boiled, I poured 2 tin cups and handed her one. She cupped it with both hands and the steam softened her face until she looked younger, or maybe just less alone. Thank you, she said simply. For the blanket, for the ride, for not asking questions I would not answer. Questions can wait, I said. Storms don't. She nodded. The wind threw a handful of snow against the shutter with a sound like rice on a drum. Far away, I thought I heard that other thump again, slower measured. Maybe it was only my heart noticing that the cabin had one more person in it than it did that morning. Maybe it was the land reminding me that nothing given is given alone, and nothing kept is kept without a reckoning. I set another log on the fire and sat on the floor with my back against the stove, so the heat could crawl into my bones. Thunder stamped outside and settled. Leah sipped coffee and pulled the bedroll to her chin. Between us lay the kind of quiet that does not demand words. I did not know yet what kindness had promised or what it would cost. I only knew I had made it and that the night was long, and that sometimes a man's life turns not on a gunshot or a kiss, but on the moment he decides to share his warmth with someone who might need it more. The storm laid its hand across the valley in the night and did not lift it. By morning, the window was a frosted square, and the door stuck against a drift like a mule that had decided it was done. The stove had burned itself low, and the edges of the room were cold again, a patient cold that waits and wins if you let it. I fed it kindling blue until the coals glowed and stood back while the flames found their courage. Leah was already awake, back propped against the bunk post, the bedroll around her shoulders like a small hill. She had the stillness of someone who had learned to save each motion for when it mattered. When I asked about her ankle, she pressed at the leather and nodded, once the kind of nod that says it is bad but not fatal. She drank coffee in slow swallows, eyes on the shutter as if she could see through wood. We ate from what I had, which was not much, and would be less by nightfall. Biscuits hard enough to put a scar on a table, a strip of meat jerky that had survived the bottom of a saddlebag by becoming almost stone, and a handful of dried apples, that tasted like memory more than fruit. She chewed without complaint. I had learned to respect people who did not insult food in winter. The wind had quieted to a steady hiss along the eaves, and under it a second sound presented itself, the low talk of the river moving beneath its crust. I cleared the door with the coal shovel, then shouldered it open. The world beyond was a page that had not yet been written on all white and gray, and the blue shade where drifts lay deeper. My boot sank to the ankle and squeaked when I pulled it free. The air took my breath and folded it in half. We did not have a long conversation about what to do. The cabin was a kind of mercy, but mercy can turn to trap when the food runs thin. North was where she pointed, and north was where she said her people were. The river cabin sat low, easy to find by others once the weather softened, and she did not like the way the night had sounded. We both heard the same distant thump, and we both pretended it might be ice. I braided rawhide into a sling and cut 2 poles for a travois from a young aspen the beaver had partway worked last summer. My hands remembered the knots before my mind did. Thunder watched as if I had invented foolishness, and he would have to carry it. Leah bound her ankle again and helped where she could, gathering cordwood to stack by the door, sweeping stove ash into a bucket for the garden that would never be mine. Small ways to pay a debt she had not been asked to pay. By noon the sky had a kind of thin light that gives nothing. We set out with her settled on the travois, the bedroll under and over her, the rope lines splayed to keep the poles from biting into Thunder's flanks. She held the coil that tied her in place, not because I doubted my knots, but because it gave a person something to do besides think. I took point-breaking trail along the cottonwoods where the snow had drifted shallower. We spoke between breaths, not in a hurry, letting the land set the pace. I asked if she had been alone long, and she said 3 days, 2 nights, though time stretches in the cold like old leather. She had fallen back when they forded a shallow braid of the river, and a hidden stone turned her foot. She waved off a sling, telling the others to go. There was a need north, and she was a person who believed in needs. I saw in her face the part of the story she had not told, the part where she chose to slow, not be slowed. I asked about the drum, and she said it is one way to talk across a distance when the sky eats words. Sometimes it is warning, sometimes it is gathering, sometimes it is a memory being carried so it does not fall behind. The sound I heard, she said, was not warning. It was a question. Then she looked at the bedroll around her and did not say more. The bedroll warmed my back through my coat with the heat her body had loaned it. It felt like a circle that had been drawn while I slept. By mid-afternoon, the trail left the river trees and climbed a low saddle where the wind had its own address. We stopped in the lee of a snowbank to rest Thunder and to let the sting out of our lungs. A fox crossed higher up, red against white tail, flagging once, as if to tip its hat to the day. The sky never fully cleared, but a milky sun made a flat coin behind the veil, and the light sharpened the edges of the world without adding any heat to it. We reached the frozen side channel that had to be crossed before the ground lifted again toward the basalt rim. On the surface, a thin gloss of ice kept its secrets. I jabbed with a stick, and the stick went through. Not a good bridge. Farther down, a tangle of willow had caught logs during spring water, now frozen into place, a kind of rough ladder. We aimed for that and took it slow. I led Thunder by the halter, and his breath smoked around his head like a lion's mane in a story. The first log held. The second complained. The third dropped one end and then thought better of it. We made it across with only one curse and a new bruise on my shin. On the far bank, the snow had been drifted and scoured by turns, rippled like a washtub bottom. The travois skittered and caught. Twice I had to lift a pole free while Thunder tossed his head to remind us he was not a machine. Leah said little, but when she did, her voice carried that steady center I had felt when she braced against the pull on her ankle. She told me where the land would open into a basin and where the creek would bend under a stand of cottonwoods, all of it in the language of a person who had watched the wind lay down snow enough times to know its habits. We camped before dark under a rock overhang that made a shallow cave. I made a small fire with willow and sage and the last of the juniper heart I had saved. I set my coat around her like a second shell and walked a wide ring to see what else had claimed the night. A pair of coyote tracks passed downslope, running the contour like water does. An owl left its signature in the powdered 2 wings drawn in perfect mirror, where it had lifted a vole and written its departure. When I came back, she had my coffee tin warming near the coals and had taken my gloves off the travois rope where I had hung them and set them close too. It felt like a small kindness bowing to a larger one. We ate the last of the apples. I told a story about mending the same fence 4 times because a bull had learned a trick I had not, and she smiled at the part where the bull taught me patience by putting me in the snow. She told one about a child who had believed the moon slept in the river by day and woke in the sky at night, and how the women of the camp had fed that wonder with songs until the child had learned to sing back. The fire made a low talk to itself while we traded these small portions of our lives, and outside the overhang, the night leaned in to listen. Before we slept, she said the thing that had been walking around us since the butte. In my people, she said, a blanket given around the shoulders is a way of saying, I will stand between you and what takes your warmth. It is a promise a person does not make by accident. Sometimes it is family. Sometimes it is the beginning of a life walk together. Always it is a weight. I looked at the bedroll at the crooked stitches my grandmother had left and I had never corrected, and I felt the weight as if it had a shape in my hands. I told her I had meant to keep her alive. She said that is the root of the promise. I asked what her people would say. She looked toward the dark beyond the fire to where the basin waited, and the cottonwoods drew a black seam against the sky. They will ask who you are when the wind is not watching, she said, and whether your warmth lasts when the story gets hard. We slept in turns, or said we did. Near dawn, the wind shifted and brought a new smell up the draw horses and wood smoke, and a spice I could not place. Thunder lifted his head and blew soft through his nose. I went to the lip of the overhang and looked east. The first thin light was riding the edge of the world, and across the fold of snow where the basin opened, I saw 3 riders on the ridge, still as carved figures, watching the place where our small fire had painted the rock. The riders did not move for a long time, just shapes against the paling sky. 3 dark brushstrokes on the ridge. The sun was still behind them, so they carried their own kind of shadow with them. Thunder stamped once, and Leah's eyes found mine across the small fire. She did not need to say anything. The look on her face told me she knew them, or at least what they meant. I banked the coals with snow and kicked dirt until the fire was only smoke. If they were Apache, smoke would say we were careless or foolish, and I wanted neither to be my first word. Leah pulled the bedroll tighter, her hands steady even though the color had drained from her cheeks. Family, I asked. Kin, she said after a pause. But not my father's people. My mother's side. They will want to know why I sit here and why I wear your blanket. I looked at the ridge again. The riders had disappeared as if the snow itself had swallowed them. Thunder blew through his nose and shook his mane uneasy. We broke camp without much talk. I strapped the travois again, though Leah said she could try the saddle. I told her not yet. The land north opened into a basin, as she had said, ringed by cottonwoods that clawed at the pale sky. The creek ran half-buried, muttering under ice. We followed its course, keeping close to the trees, letting their bony arms hide us from whatever watched. By mid-morning, the riders returned, but closer this time. 7 of them now, not 3, their horses painted with stripes of ash and clay. They did not rush us or circle like raiders. They came straight, a deliberate approach. I stopped Thunder and set both hands on the horn so they could see. I carried no rifle. Leah straightened her chin high despite the pain in her ankle. An older man led them, hair-bound with rawhide, the lines on his face cut deep as canyon walls. He raised a hand palm out, and the others halted behind him. When he spoke, it was in Apache. First the words like the rush of water over stone, then slower in English. You gave her the blanket. It was not a question. She would have frozen, I said. I gave what I had. The old man's eyes moved to the crooked stitching on the wool draped over her shoulders. He seemed to measure it, then measure me. You understand what that means? She told me, I said. I didn't know at the time. A murmur ran through the riders, low and tight. One younger man spat in the snow and glared at me the way a coyote glares before it lunges. Leah spoke, then quick and clear in her own tongue. The old man listened, nodding once, then turned his gaze back to me. My people cannot throw away words or gifts, he said. A blanket is a promise. It binds you to her. Bind you to us. You are not free of it. I felt the weight of the valley pressing in the cold. The eyes, the way Thunder's hide twitched under my hand. Then let me prove I meant what she thinks I meant. Let me stand where she stands if you'll allow it. The old man's mouth curved, not a smile, not yet, but something like respect. Words are wind. Proof is in what a man carries when it costs him. He gestured and two of the riders dismounted. They spoke to Laya, voices softer than I expected, helping her from the travois. She winced but stood on one leg, leaning on one of them, as if he were a brother. I felt a strange tug in my chest, watching her among them, half belonging, half not. "You will ride with us," the old man said. "You will come to the fire. The council will see if your warmth is true." I wanted to ask how long, what it meant, what they would demand. But questions could sound like excuses, and excuses smelled like fear. So I only nodded and swung into the saddle. The column formed around us, Laya in the middle. Me a little behind her, the old man riding to my left. No one spoke as we moved across the basin. The snow squeaked under hooves, and now and then a crow cut across the sky like a thrown knife. By the time we reached their camp, the sun had tipped past noon. It sat in a hidden valley, the lodges low and brown against the snow smoke curling from their tops in threads. Children ran between them, their laughter breaking when they saw us, their eyes sharp with questions they did not speak. Women stepped from doorways. Some curious, others cold, their gazes lingering on the blanket at Laya's shoulders, then on me. At the center stood a great fire pit, its circle of stones blackened from years of use. Around it, logs and stones for seats. Already men gathered there, their faces carved with lines of decision. The old man raised his hand again, calling the place to silence. Then he spoke, his voice carrying like the fire itself. This man gave his blanket, his warmth, his promise. Now he must walk the path he chose. All eyes turned to me. Laya's too dark and searching. My mouth was dry as dust. The flames threw shadows that seemed to reach and pull at me. I felt as though the whole valley had leaned in to listen to what I would say. "Then I'll walk it," I said, my voice rough but steady. I didn't mean to promise more than I could keep. "But I won't turn from it now. If you'll have me, I'll stand." The murmurs that followed were like the wind through pine, sharp and restless. Some nodded. Some shook their heads. The old man watched without a blink, then lifted his hand again for silence. At sunset, he said, "You begin the trials." The words struck like an axe splitting wood. Trials. I did not know yet what they would be, but I knew they would measure me in ways a man cannot fake. Leah's gaze met mine across the fire, steady, unreadable. But her fingers gripped the blanket tighter, as if reminding both of us what had brought us here. And the sun began its slow drop toward the rim of the valley, pulling me with it into whatever waited. The sun slipped lower, dragging the light with it until the whole valley burned in copper and shadow. Smoke rose from the central fire like a tether to the sky, carrying the weight of expectation with it. I stood on one side of the circle, my boots sinking in the packed snow, and across from me the elders gathered. Leah sat near her grandmother, head bowed but eyes flicking toward me whenever she thought no one noticed. The old man who had led the riders, Chief Gray Eagle Leah, whispered his name, lifted a staff carved with symbols I couldn't read. His voice rolled through the camp, first in Apache, then broken into English. "A man's words are nothing without proof. Tonight you show what kind of man you are. Strength, wisdom, sacrifice. If you fail, the promise dies with you. If you succeed, you live among us. Her blanket is your bond. Your choice has already been made." My stomach felt heavy, like I had swallowed a stone, but I nodded. Backing down wasn't an option. For the first trial, they led me to the cliff that towered over the valley. Its face was jagged, streaked with ice, the kind of wall even mountain goats thought twice about. A rope of braided rawhide lay coiled at the base. Gray Eagle pointed to the top, where a dark smudge marked a nest wedged into the stone. "The eagle lives there," he said. "Bring back a feather. Climb with your hands and your will. Fall and the rocks keep you." Talon, the young warrior with eyes like sharpened obsidian, stepped forward, his mouth curled in a sneer. "He won't last 10 feet, he muttered loud enough for all to hear. Laughter rippled among some of the younger men. I stripped off my coat, tied the rope around my waist, and tested the cliff with my fingers. The stone was cold, cruel, but it had edges, cracks, places a man could cling if he was stubborn enough. I hauled myself up, one hand after another, boots scraping for purchase. The first stretch was easier than I expected, but my arms began to burn quick. My palms stung as the rope bit into skin. Halfway up, a slab of rock I trusted gave way, tumbling down in a shower of shards. I dangled free legs, kicking the rope, jerking hard against my ribs. Gas rose from below. Talon laughed. But then I looked down at Laya. Her face was tilted upward, her hand clenched on the blanket draped around her shoulders. There was no fear in her eyes, only fierce determination, as though she were climbing with me through sheer force of will. That look steadied me. I jammed my boot into a narrow crack, hauled myself higher inch by inch. By the time I reached the nest, sweat froze on my brow. My muscles screamed and my chest felt like it might split. The eagle burst from the shadows, wings battering, talons flashing. It slashed my shoulder, tearing cloth and skin, but I clung on. In the nest, a single feather gleamed gold-brown, caught between twigs. I grabbed it, shoved it inside my shirt, and began the long crawl down. When my boots hit the ground, my legs folded beneath me. The world swam, but I held up the feather. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fire. Even Talon's smirk faded, replaced by something like grudging surprise. Gray Eagle stepped forward, lifted the feather, and nodded. The first trial is done. Strength is proven. They gave me a moment to drink water to bind the cut on my shoulder. Then Gray Eagle placed a carved stone in my hands. Symbols etched into its surface, twisted in the firelight. The second trial, he said. Wisdom. Understand the story this stone tells before the fire dies. The crowd settled around the pit, their faces a ring of expectation. The fire roared high now, but wood burns fast in the mountain air. I stared at the symbols. Some looked like animals, a bear, an eagle, a snake. Others like the sun, the moon, the spiral of seasons. And at the center, a figure with lines radiating outward. My head throbbed with the weight of it. I didn't know their tongue, their stories. The fire sank lower. Whispers passed through the circle. Talon leaned forward, his eyes bright with victory already. Then I remembered the blanket, the choice I'd made without knowing it. Not the blanket itself, but what it meant, warmth given when it cost you something. Compassion chosen over fear. The symbols weren't about animals or stones. They were about choices. I stood holding the stone high. The bear is taking by force, I said. The eagle is rising above others untouched. The snake is shedding, abandoning when it grows hard. But this, I touched the spiral and the central figure. This is giving warmth even when it hurts. That's the path I took. That's why I'm here. The fire dropped to embers glowing red, but Gray Eagle's hand rose. He spoke sharply and Leah translated her voice thick with emotion. He says, wisdom isn't knowing our symbols, but knowing yourself. You chose the path of compassion. The second trial is complete. A murmur spread, not mockery this time, but surprise. Talon's jaw tightened and he looked away. But Gray Eagle wasn't done. He lifted a small leather pouch, the clinking inside like bones. The third trial, he said. Sacrifice. Give up what you value most, or all you've proven means nothing. He pointed at my horse tethered nearby, my revolver at my side, and finally at the worn photograph in my shirt pocket. My parents, the last tie to the life I'd left behind. My throat closed. Thunder was freedom, the gun survival, the photograph my past. But as I looked at Laya clutching the blanket tighter, I knew the truth. I pulled out the photograph, stared at the faces frozen in time, then laid it in the coals. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished into smoke. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Even Talon looked shaken. Gray Eagle's voice rumbled like stone. Leah translated tears in her eyes. You have shown strength, wisdom, and now sacrifice. You gave up your past to stand in the present. The trials are complete. You are one of us. Elder Willow, who had glared at me before, stepped forward and placed a deer-hide shirt in my hands, beaded in bright colors. Her sharp eyes softened. Welcome, son, Laya whispered, translating. For the first time since the storm, I felt steady. Not because I had passed their test, but because I knew the blanket had led me here for a reason. The drums began low and steady, a heartbeat rising from the earth itself. Leah stood beside me, her hand brushing mine, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Whatever storm had carried me into this valley, I understood now. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been a beginning. The drums rolled long into the night, their rhythm weaving with the crackle of fire until it seemed the whole valley beat with a single heart. Men stamped their boots in time, women's voices lifted in song, and the children ran in circles around the fire, their laughter flashing like sparks. I stood at the edge of it all, the deer-hide shirt heavy on my shoulders, still smelling of smoke and earth. Leah stayed close, her grandmother's eyes following us with the sharpness of a hawk. Talon lurked near the shadows, arms crossed, his face carved with grudging silence. Though the tribe had spoken, his pride had not bent. I could feel his glare like a blade pressed between my shoulder blades. Gray Eagle approached, staff in hand. A man is not judged only by trials, he said. He is judged by how he carries himself after. Tomorrow you work beside us. You hunt, you mend, you show if your promise is more than firelight. I nodded. I'll do what's asked. The chief's eyes narrowed. Not asked, expected. If you walk away, the blanket burns. After the fire dwindled, Laya guided me to a small lodge near the creek. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of sage and pine. Furs were laid out in neat order, and a clay bowl of stew waited on the coals. I ate slowly, though hunger gnawed at me. She did not eat, only watched. You gave up your family's picture, she said quietly. It was the only thing I had left of them. I admitted, but holding on meant I wasn't holding what was in front of me. She looked down, fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. In our ways, a sacrifice like that binds stronger than words. It means you see with both eyes, not just one. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying voices and hoofbeats. Talon's voice rose among them, sharp and bitter. Leah stiffened. He won't accept this. He wanted me as his wife. Your trials only wounded his pride. I set down the bowl. Then he'll come for me. He'll come for both of us, she said. Dawn came, gray mist hanging low over the valley. I joined the men to gather wood, my hands blistering under the weight of the axe. They watched in silence, waiting for weakness. I swung until my arms screamed, until sweat froze on my back. No one spoke praise, but no one turned away either. In the afternoon, I joined a hunting party. The snow muffled every step, each breath pluming white. We tracked deer through the ridges, Talon at the lead. More than once, I felt his eyes on me, rather than the trail. When the deer finally bolted, I raised my rifle, but Talon loosed an arrow first. The animal dropped clean, and he turned to me with a smirk. Your gun is loud, he said. Our ways are quieter. I lowered the rifle, biting back the words I wanted to say. Silence was the only answer that wouldn't sound like excuse. That night, meat roasted over the fire. I shared what little knowledge I had of cattle drives, of branding, of reading the sky for storms. Some listened, some scoffed. But slowly the circle around me grew less tight, the stares less sharp. Laya sat across the flames, her eyes catching mine. The blanket still cloaked her shoulders, its crooked stitches glowing red in the firelight. When she smiled, it was small, but it held more weight than all the trials combined. Later, when the fire burned low, Gray Eagle spoke again. A man can pass trials in a day, but living beside us will test him every day. If you fail, no blanket saves you. I met his gaze, the staff gleaming in the embers. Then every day I'll prove it again. The old man studied me, then nodded once. Behind him, Talon's shadow shifted, restless. The storm between us had not broken, not yet. But as the night deepened, Leah's hand brushed mine, hidden beneath the folds of the blanket. And in that quiet touch, I found enough warmth to face whatever the next day demanded. The days that followed moved like a river after thaw, slow but unstoppable. Each morning I rose with the tribe, taking what work was given. I hauled wood from the slopes, fetched water in heavy clay jars, mended harness leather until my fingers cracked. Every task was a test, though no one said it outright. Some watched with suspicion, others with quiet curiosity, as if waiting to see if the stranger with the blanket would stumble. Leah walked with a cane carved from willow, her ankle bound tight. Though she could not move quickly, she never sat idle. She ground corn, tended fires, soothed children when they grew restless. Her grandmother still looked at me with flint in her eyes, but she softened when Leah's laugh returned to the camp. One evening, I found myself teaching two young boys how to braid a rope from horsehair. Their hands were clumsy, their knots sloppy, but their eyes shone when the braid held together. I remembered myself at their age sitting at my mother's knee-twisting cord for the first time. The memory stung, but it was not bitter. For the first time in years, the past felt like something I could let rest. Yet not all welcomed me. Talon's silence was louder than words. He watched every move I made, his jaw clenched, his hands restless near the knife at his belt. One night by the fire, he finally spoke, voice, carrying so all could hear. Strength shown once can be luck. Wisdom spoken once can be borrowed. Sacrifice made once can be play acting. Let him show what he is when blood is on the ground. Gray Eagle silenced him with a glance, but I could feel the words settle into the circle. Doubt lingers like smoke. Even when the fire is gone, the smell remains. The chance Talon sought came sooner than I expected. A hunting party returned with news raiders from another band, had cut across the northern ridge, driving off 2 ponies. It was a small theft, but in the high country, every loss cuts deep. Gray Eagle gathered men to track the thieves. When I stood with them, Talon laughed openly. You think a blanket makes you one of us tonight? You'll find out how quickly it burns. The chief looked at me long before he spoke. You may come, but if you run, you shame us all. We rode under a sky brittle with stars, the cold sharp enough to bite skin through fur. Laya pressed the blanket into my hands before I left. Return with it, she whispered, not with excuses. The raiders had camped near a stand of cedars, their fire low, their ponies tethered. We moved like shadows circling. Talon signaled and the group split. I found myself paired with him, his bow in hand, my rifle heavy at my side. As we crept forward, a twig snapped under my boot. The nearest raider stirred, half rising. Talon drew his bow, but the angle was wrong. Without thinking, I lunged, tackling the man before he could shout. We hit the snow hard, his knife flashing. I caught his wrist, struggled, the blade nicking my cheek. Talon's arrow hissed past, striking another raider who had reached for his weapon. The fight was brief, sharp, full of breath and blood and snow. When it was done, the ponies were ours again, and the raiders fled into the dark. I stood chest heaving, the raider's knife still clutched in my hand. Talon looked at me, sweat freezing on his brow, his eyes unreadable. He spoke low, almost grudging. You fought like a man who wanted to live, maybe even like one of us. Back at camp, Gray Eagle heard the story and said only actions prove louder than trials. But the look in his eyes carried more weight than any words. When the fire burned low that night, I sat beside Laya. She touched the cut on my cheek, her fingers gentle. You keep giving pieces of yourself, she murmured. Strength past blood. When nothing is left, what remains? I caught her hand, held it in mine. What remains is choice, and I choose this. I choose you. The blanket was around both our shoulders, then warm against the cold. And though the night stretched long, for the first time, I felt no distance between where I was and where I was meant to be. The snow began to soften with the coming of spring, dripping from the lodge roofs and swelling the creek until its song could be heard all through the valley. With the thaw came work fences, to mend ponies, to tend fields, to prepare for planting. I put my back into every task, not because anyone ordered me, but because I wanted no doubt left in their eyes that I belonged. Still, doubt lingers longer than snow. Some men nodded when I passed. Others turned away. Children followed me with wide eyes, half curious, half afraid. Elder Willow spoke little, though her gaze was less sharp than before. It was Talon whose silence weighed the most, like a storm that never broke. One afternoon, I was repairing a corral post when he came, his shadow falling long across the ground. He leaned against the rail, arms folded, eyes hard. You bled with us against raiders, he said flatly. But bleeding once doesn't make you kin. You walk with Leah under that blanket as if the world agreed. But I don't. Not yet. I set the hammer down slow. Then tell me what would convince you. His mouth curved, not in a smile, but something colder. A test not given by elders, man to man. If you stand, you keep her. If you fall, the blanket is mine. I met his stare. His challenge wasn't just jealousy, it was pride. Honor the wound of being passed over. I thought of refusing, but refusal would only brand me coward. When I asked. At moonrise, he said, and walked away. Word spread quick. By nightfall, the whole village gathered near the creek, its banks still crusted with ice. Torches flared, shadows leaping on the water. Talon waited bare-chested, his knife sheathed, his fists wrapped in rawhide. Leah stood at the edge of the circle, the blanket tight around her shoulders. Her eyes found mine, filled with fear she did not voice. Gray Eagle raised a hand. No blades, no death. This fight is for truth, not blood. End it when one cannot rise. The crowd hushed. Talon stepped forward. Muscles taut, his stance low. I matched him, heart hammering. He struck first, a quick jab that split my lip. I staggered, tasted iron. He came again, heavy, but I ducked, drove my shoulder into his chest, sent us both crashing into the snow. We rolled, fists thudding, breath burning, the circle roaring around us. Talon was faster, sharper, but I had the stubborn weight of years behind me. Every time he knocked me down, I forced myself up. Every time my vision blurred, I thought of Leah, of the blanket, of the promise I hadn't asked for, but had chosen anyway. Finally, he swung wide. I caught his arm, twisted, and drove him to the ground. He bucked once, twice, then stilled my knee, pressing his chest. His breath came ragged, his eyes blazing. Yield, I said through broken breath. For a long moment he stared, pride warring with defeat. Then slowly he struck the ground with his fist once, twice. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in murmurs of disbelief. I stood swaying, blood running warm down my chin. Talon rose slower, his gaze still fierce. But when he looked at me this time, it was different, not soft, not forgiving, but edged with respect. He spoke low enough for me to hear. You fight like a man who belongs. Maybe she chose well. The circle broke, the tribe dispersing. Leah came to me, her hands gentle as she pressed the blanket against my split lip. Her voice trembled. You could have died. I managed a smile, crooked and tired. But I didn't. And now even Talon knows I meant what I promised. Her hand lingered on my cheek, her eyes shining in the torchlight. Then maybe she whispered, it's time I made a promise too. And for the first time, it wasn't only the blanket binding us, it was her choice, clear and strong, wrapping around me with a warmth no storm could steal.